The frozen corpse hanging from Rowan Mercer's cabin door wasn't supposed to be there. Neither was the terrified woman hiding inside his woodshed, clutching stolen documents worth more than his life. What started as a simple mail-order marriage in the Colorado Rockies became a blood-soaked fight for survival when Clara's past came hunting with bullets and fire. This is their story: violence, betrayal, and a love forged in gunpowder. If you stay until the end, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to where it all began. The locomotive's brakes screamed against frozen rails, metal grinding metal until the whole platform shuddered. Rowan Mercer stood motionless in the snow, watching steam billow from the engine like breath from a dying animal. February in the Colorado Rockies didn't forgive mistakes, and he'd made a big one paying for a wife he'd never seen. The depot clerk had promised him a widow, tough stock, someone who'd buried a husband and knew what hard living meant. Rowan needed that. Winter lasted 8 months this high up, and the isolation killed softer people than cold ever did. But the woman stepping down from the passenger car wasn't what he'd ordered. She moved like a deer that had just heard the rifle crack, all jerking stops and wide eyes. Her dress was velvet, dark green, and completely wrong for mountain country. The fabric was torn along one sleeve, and her traveling cloak hung crooked across her shoulders. She carried a single battered suitcase, gripping it with both hands like it might run away. Rowan's jaw tightened. He was 42, built like the trees he felled, with a face that looked like it had been carved with a dull axe. Scars ran through his beard on the left side, where a grizzly had gotten too close 5 years back. His hands were the size of dinner plates, calloused and scarred from trap lines and axe handles. This woman looked like she'd snap in the first real wind. "You Mercer." The conductor appeared behind her, already reaching for her luggage. The woman flinched away from him. Rowan walked forward, his boots crunching through ice. Up close, she was younger than he'd expected, maybe 25. Her face was pale, almost gray, with shadows under her eyes that spoke of bad sleep and worse circumstances. But her eyes themselves, they were different. Dark and sharp and taking in everything. The way she looked at him wasn't fear exactly. It was calculation. "Clara Whitmore?" he asked. "Yes." Her voice was quiet but steady. Eastern accent, educated. "You're not what I paid for." She stiffened. "The arrangement was made. I'm here to honor it." The arrangement was for a frontier widow, someone who knows mountain living. He gestured at her dress. "You look like you got lost on the way to a theater." 2 spots of color appeared on her cheeks. "I can learn." "No." Rowan turned to the conductor. "Put her on the return train. This was a mistake." "There's no return train until spring thaw," the conductor said, already walking away. "Track's closing down tomorrow." "You two sort it out." Clara's eyes widened slightly, the first real crack in whatever mask she was wearing. She watched the conductor disappear into the station, then turned back to Rowan. "I'm staying," she said. "Like hell you are. We have a contract." She set down her suitcase and reached into her cloak, pulling out a folded paper. Her hand shook slightly as she unfolded it. "You paid the arrangement fee. I accepted the terms. It's legally binding." Rowan stared at her. "You think a piece of paper means anything out here?" "I think a man's word means something. You gave yours when you signed this." There was steel in her voice now, under the fear. Rowan had to respect that, even as it annoyed him. He took the contract, scanned it quickly. His signature was there, big and rough next to the agency's careful script. He'd been drunk when he signed it. Lonely and stupid and drunk. "Why?" he asked, handing it back. "Why what?" "Why are you here? Women like you don't answer frontier marriage arrangements unless they're running from something." She flinched. It was slight, but he caught it. "I need a new start," she said carefully. "What did you do?" "Nothing criminal." That was a specific denial. Too specific. Rowan felt a cold weight settle in his gut. He'd spent 20 years in these mountains learning to read sign. Animal tracks, weather patterns, the way snow settled on a slope before an avalanche. People weren't that different. This woman was lying, and whatever she was running from was bad. He should send her back. But the conductor was right. There was no train until April at earliest, and winter was coming down hard. Already the sky had that yellow-gray color that meant heavy snow before nightfall. You ever chopped wood? He asked. No. Hauled water from a creek through snow? No. Skinned an animal? Rendered fat? Kept a fire going for 12 hours straight? I can learn, she said again, quieter now. Rowan laughed, but there was no humor in it. You'll be dead in a month. Then that's my problem. It's my problem when I have to dig your grave in frozen ground. She met his eyes. I'm not going back. They stood there in the falling snow, two strangers locked in a battle of wills neither could afford to lose. Finally, Rowan swore under his breath and picked up her suitcase. It was heavier than it looked. What's in here? He asked. Personal items. This weighs 40 pounds. I pack heavy. Another lie. Rowan wanted to dump the suitcase in the snow and see what spilled out, but people were starting to watch from the station windows. He jerked his head toward the wagon. We've got 3 hours of daylight left. My cabin's 2 hours north if the road's clear. You slow me down, I'm leaving you. She followed him to the wagon without another word. It was a rough thing, more sledge than wagon this time of year, with runners instead of wheels and a canvas cover to keep the worst weather off. His 2 mules stood patient in their traces, their breath steaming. Rowan threw her suitcase in the back harder than necessary. She climbed up onto the bench seat without help, arranging her ridiculous velvet skirt as best she could. He noticed her boots then, leather, good quality, but city boots. Wrong sole, wrong height. Her feet would be frozen before they were halfway home. He climbed up beside her and took the reins. You got gloves? She shook her head. He reached under the seat and pulled out an extra pair of his work gloves. They were massive on her hands, but she put them on without comment. Thank you, she said quietly. Rowan didn't answer. He snapped the reins and the mules started forward, pulling the sledge up the main road out of town. Within minutes, the depot disappeared behind them into the gray-white landscape. The silence stretched between them like the frozen miles ahead. Rowan kept his eyes on the road, watching for ice patches and washouts. The woman sat rigid beside him, hands folded in her lap, not speaking. After an hour, she started shivering. The temperature was dropping fast, and that velvet dress might as well have been paper. Rowan swore again and reached behind the seat for a wool blanket. He threw it at her. Wrap up before you freeze. She took it gratefully, pulling it around her shoulders. I didn't think it would be this cold. It's not even winter yet. This is autumn. Her shivering got worse. Rowan felt a spike of anger, not at her, but at the whole stupid situation, at himself for being lonely enough to order a wife, at her for being desperate enough to answer, at the world for being the kind of place that made people this desperate. What's your real name? He asked. She went very still. Clara Whitmore. That's the name on the contract. I'm asking what your real name is. It's Clara. And Whitmore? She didn't answer. I'm going to find out, he said. These mountains are isolated, but news travels, especially news about people running from something. I'm not running. You're terrified. You've got a suitcase full of something heavy that isn't clothes. And you'd rather freeze to death in the Rockies than go back wherever you came from. He glanced at her. That's running. She pulled the blanket tighter. If you're going to send me back anyway, why do you care? Because you're here now, and whatever trouble you brought with you, it's my problem until spring. I won't bring you trouble. Too late. The mules labored up a steep slope, their hooves finding purchase on ice-covered stone. The trail narrowed, with a rock face on one side and a drop-off on the other that disappeared into mist. Clara gripped the edge of the seat, her knuckles white even through the oversized gloves. Don't look down, Rowan said. I'm fine. You're turning green. I said I'm fine. The trail leveled out onto a high plateau. Up here, the wind hit them full force, screaming across the open ground and cutting through clothes like they weren't there. Clara's shivering turned violent. Rowan pulled the sledge to a stop. Get in the back, he ordered. What? Under the canvas, it's warmer. I need to focus on the trail, not watching you fall off the seat. She didn't argue, just climbed awkwardly over the seat and disappeared under the canvas cover. Rowan heard her arranging things back there, making space among his supplies. Flour, salt, ammunition, lamp oil, all the things he'd need to survive until spring. He got the mules moving again. The trail got worse, winding through stands of pine that creaked and groaned in the wind. Snow started falling, light at first, then heavier. Rowan pushed the mules harder. He knew this country, knew how fast weather could turn lethal. From under the canvas, he heard Clara's voice, muffled. How much farther? Hour if we're lucky, 2 if we're not. And if we get stuck, we won't. But if we do, then we freeze to death. Stop talking. You're letting cold air under the canvas. She went quiet. Rowan focused on the trail, reading the landscape through the thickening snow. He'd made this run 100 times, knew every switchback and creek crossing. But winter made everything different. The familiar became dangerous. The snow fell harder. Wind carved it into strange shapes across the trail. Rowan's beard frosted over. His face went numb. He kept the mules moving through sheer will, talking to them in a low, steady voice that was more feeling than words. When the cabin finally appeared through the trees, Rowan felt his shoulders drop with relief he wouldn't admit. It was a solid structure, logs chinked with mud and moss, a stone chimney, shuttered windows, and a roof that could hold 6 feet of snow. He'd built it himself 15 years ago, and it had kept him alive ever since. He pulled the sledge up to the porch and set the brake. His hands were stiff with cold as he climbed down. The cabin door was locked, ice already forming in the jamb. He had to kick it twice before it opened. Inside was dark and cold. Rowan moved through it by memory, finding the lamp on the table and the matches beside it. Light flared, pushing back the darkness. The cabin was a single large room with a sleeping loft above. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. There was a table, 2 chairs, a counter for food preparation, and shelves holding supplies. His bed was up in the loft, a mattress stuffed with pine needles and covered with bearskins. Everything was clean but bare, the home of a man who owned only what he needed. Rowan heard Clara climb down from the sledge. She appeared in the doorway, her face pale in the lamplight, snowflakes caught in her dark hair. "This is it?" she asked. "What were you expecting?" "I don't know. Something more." "This is the Rockies, not Philadelphia." He moved to the fireplace, started building a fire with practiced efficiency. "Unload your suitcase. Everything else stays on the sledge until I get the mules settled." She didn't move. "I said unload your suitcase," Rowan repeated, harder. "Where should I put it?" "I don't care. Find a corner." She stepped inside, carrying her battered case with both hands. She looked around the bare cabin like someone surveying a prison cell, then set the suitcase beside the door. Rowan got the fire going, feeding it kindling until flames caught. Heat started pushing into the room. He stood, brushing off his hands. "There's a barn out back for the mules. I'll get them settled, then finish unloading. You stay here and warm up." "I can help." "No, you'll slow me down." He left before she could argue, stepping back into the storm. The cold hit him like a fist after the brief warmth inside. He got the mules moving around the cabin to the barn, a 3-sided structure built against the mountain face. It wasn't much, but it kept the worst weather off. Inside, 2 milk goats looked up at his arrival, chewing placidly. Rowan unhitched the mules and got them into stalls with hay and water. His hands moved automatically through the familiar work. Feed, water, check hooves, brush down. The animals were his lifeline. Without them, he'd starve. By the time he finished, full night had fallen. Snow was coming down in sheets now, already covering the sledge. Rowan worked fast, hauling supplies from the sledge into the cabin. Flour sacks, salt, coffee, ammunition, lamp oil. Everything had its place. Clara watched from beside the fire, not speaking. When he brought in the last load, a heavy bundle of furs from his fall trapping, she finally spoke. "Can I do anything?" "You know how to cook?" "Yes." "There's salt pork and beans in that barrel, coffee in the tin. Make something." She moved to the counter, her movements uncertain in the unfamiliar space. Rowan hung the furs on wall hooks to finish drying, then went to the loft and dug through a trunk. He found what he was looking for, a pair of old wool pants, a heavy shirt, and boots that had belonged to his younger brother before he died 10 years back. He came down and dropped them on the table. "Put these on. That dress is useless up here." Clara looked at the men's clothes. "These are warm. That's all that matters. Where should I change?" "Loft? I'm going back out to check the barn." He left again, giving her privacy. Outside, the storm was turning vicious. Wind howled through the trees, snow piled up fast. Rowan checked the barn one more time, making sure everything was secure, then fought his way back to the cabin. Inside, Clara had changed. The wool pants were too big, cinched tight with a belt. The shirt hung loose, but she looked less like she was going to blow away now. She'd pulled her hair back in a practical bun and was stirring something over the fire. "There's no proper stove," she said. "Fire's good enough." "For cooking every meal? You got other options?" She didn't answer, just kept stirring. Rowan hung up his coat and knocked snow off his boots. The cabin was warming up now, heat from the fire pushing into the corners. He sat at the table and watched her work. She was clumsy with the camp pot, uncertain about the heat. But she didn't quit. When she burned her hand on the metal handle, she just wrapped it in a cloth and kept going. 20 minutes later, she put a bowl in front of him. Beans and salt pork, cooked simple but edible. She'd made coffee too, strong and bitter the way he liked it. "Sit," he said, gesturing at the other chair. She sat, her own bowl in front of her. They ate in silence, the only sound the fire crackling and wind screaming outside. Finally, Clara spoke. "Where do I sleep?" Rowan hadn't thought about that. There was only one bed, up in the loft. "Loft?" he said. "I'll sleep down here." "That's your bed." "I've slept in worse places." "I can't take your bed." "You can, and you will." He finished his coffee. "I don't need you freezing to death the first night because you're too polite to take the warm spot." She looked like she wanted to argue, but didn't have the energy. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. This whole thing is a mistake." "You keep saying that, because it's true." She set down her spoon. "You don't know anything about me." "I know enough. You're scared. You're running, and you're not built for this life." "You're wrong about the last part." "Am I?" He leaned back in his chair. "You got soft hands. You don't know how to dress for weather. You can barely cook over a fire. What exactly makes you think you can survive up here?" Her jaw tightened. "I survived this long, didn't I?" "Surviving isn't the same as living. Up here, winter doesn't care how determined you are. It kills people who know what they're doing. Someone like you, someone like me what?" Her voice went sharp. "You don't know what I've survived. You don't know what I left behind." "Then tell me." "No." They stared at each other across the table, the fire casting shadows on the log walls. Outside, the storm intensified. Finally, Rowan stood. "I'm checking the animals one more time. You should sleep. Days start early up here." He put on his coat and went back out into the screaming dark. In the barn, the mules and goats were settled. Rowan stood in the doorway watching snow pile up and wondered what the hell he'd gotten himself into. When he came back inside, Clara was climbing the ladder to the loft. She moved carefully, still awkward in the oversized clothes. Rowan banked the fire and spread bearskins on the floor near the hearth. It would be warm enough down here. He'd slept in far worse conditions. He lay down, staring at the ceiling, listening to Clara moving around above him. Eventually, she went still. The cabin settled into quiet, just wind and fire and the creaking of logs under snow weight. Rowan didn't sleep. His mind kept circling back to the woman in his loft, the fear in her eyes, the weight in her suitcase, the lies she told. He'd made a mistake bringing her here. But what choice did he have? Leave her to freeze in town? Tomorrow, he'd figure this out. Set some rules. Make her understand what life up here actually meant. If she quit after a week, fine. He'd take her back to town when the trail opened and call it a lesson learned. But something in her eyes told him she wouldn't quit. Whatever she was running from was worse than anything these mountains could throw at her. And that, Rowan thought, was the most dangerous kind of desperation. The days that followed fell into a brutal rhythm. Rowan woke before dawn, built up the fire, and went out to check traps and hunt. Clara woke to an empty cabin and a list of chores written on a scrap of paper. Haul water, feed animals, clean, cook, keep the fire going. She failed at almost everything. The water buckets were too heavy. She could barely drag them from the creek, spilling half the contents in the snow. Feeding the animals terrified her. The mules were huge, and the goats kept trying to eat her clothes. Cooking over an open fire burned half the food and undercooked the rest. But she didn't quit. Every evening, Rowan returned to find her still trying. Her hands were blistered and raw. Her face was chapped from wind. She moved like every muscle hurt. But the fire was burning, and supper was waiting, even if it was half-charred. He didn't praise her, didn't encourage her, just ate what she cooked and left new instructions for the next day. At night, he slept on the floor while she took the loft. They barely spoke. The silence between them was heavy with everything unsaid. A week passed, then 2. Clara's hands toughened. Her movements became more efficient. She learned to judge the fire's heat, to lift the water buckets without spilling, to approach the animals without fear. Rowan watched it happen and felt something uncomfortable stirring in his chest. Respect, maybe. Or recognition. She was learning the same way he had once, through pain and stubbornness and refusing to break. One evening, he came back to find her outside in the snow, axe in hand, trying to split wood. She was doing it wrong, all arms, no leverage, but she was trying. "Stop," he said, walking over. She lowered the axe, breathing hard. "I can do this." "Not like that. You'll break your wrist." He took the axe from her. "Watch." He showed her the proper stance, the way to read the wood grain, where to aim the blade. Then he handed it back. "Try again." She did. The wood didn't split, but the axe bit deeper this time. "Better," he said, and walked into the cabin. Behind him, he heard her swing again. The temperature dropped. Real winter was coming, the kind that turned breath to ice and made skin crack and bleed. Rowan went out to check his trap lines in the high country, planning to be gone 3 days. "Keep the fire going," he told Clara. "Don't let it die, not even for a minute. You understand?" She nodded. "There's enough wood stacked on the porch for 4 days if you're careful. I'll be back before you run out." "What if you're not?" "Then chop more." He left at dawn, pack on his back, rifle in hand. The trap lines ran through hard country, steep ravines and dense forest where predators outnumbered prey. It was dangerous work, but it was what he knew. As he climbed into the high country, Rowan found himself thinking about Clara, wondering if she'd keep the fire going, wondering if she'd be there when he got back, or if she'd finally given up and tried to walk to town. He checked that thought. It didn't matter. She was a temporary problem. Come spring, she'd leave, and his life would go back to normal. But something about that thought felt wrong now. In the cabin, Clara stood alone in the silence. The fire crackled. Outside, wind howled. She looked at her blistered hands, at the rough walls, at the life she'd chosen. No, not chosen. Run to. She went to her suitcase and opened it. Inside, beneath a thin layer of clothes, were the ledgers. Thick books filled with numbers and names and proof of crimes that would destroy powerful men if anyone saw them. She'd stolen them from the railroad company where she'd worked as an accountant. Stolen them after discovering they were using company funds to hire killers, to bribe judges, to murder homesteaders who wouldn't sell their land. She'd taken the evidence and run, and the men chasing her wouldn't stop until she was dead. Clara closed the suitcase. Rowan didn't know what he'd brought into his home. What danger now lived under his roof? She should tell him, should warn him. But if she did, he'd send her away, and she had nowhere left to go. So she fed the fire, and she kept the secret, and she prayed the past would stay buried until spring. Outside, the first real storm of winter began to build on the horizon. The storm hit on Rowan's second night away. Clara woke to wind that sounded like something alive and furious trying to tear the cabin apart. The shutters rattled violently. Snow forced its way through cracks in the walls, dusting the floor with white powder. She climbed down from the loft, her breath visible in the frigid air, and found the fire burning low. Her heart kicked hard. "Don't let it die," Rowan had said, "not even for a minute." She fed it wood, her hands shaking from cold and fear. The flames grew, pushing back the darkness, and she crouched in front of them, absorbing heat like a starving animal. Outside, the storm screamed louder. By morning, snow had buried the porch. Clara had to shove the door with her shoulder to open it enough to squeeze through. The world outside was white chaos, wind driving snow sideways, visibility maybe 10 feet. She couldn't see the barn, couldn't see the trees, just white and more white. The animals needed feeding. She wrapped herself in every piece of warm clothing she could find. Rowan's extra coat over the wool shirt, 2 pairs of socks inside the oversized boots, a scarf wound around her face until only her eyes showed. Then she grabbed the bucket of grain and pushed into the storm. The wind hit her like a physical blow. Snow stung her exposed skin, found every gap in her clothing. She couldn't breathe without inhaling ice. The barn was maybe 30 yards away, but it felt like miles. Clara put her head down and walked. The grain bucket banged against her leg. Wind shoved her sideways. She stumbled, caught herself, kept moving. Her eyes watered and froze. She couldn't feel her feet. When she finally reached the barn, Her hands were so numb she could barely work the latch. Inside, the mules stamped nervously. The goats huddled together in the corner, their eyes wide. "I know," Claire said through chattering teeth. "I'm scared too." She poured grain into their troughs with shaking hands, then broke the ice on their water buckets. The work was clumsy and slow, but she got it done. As she turned to leave, one of the mules, the gray one Rowan called Brutus, pushed his nose against her shoulder. "I don't have anything else," she said. He just stood there, breathing warm air against her frozen face. Clara reached up and touched his neck, feeling the solid warmth of living muscle beneath winter coat. Something about that simple contact steadied her. "I'll come back tonight," she promised. "Try not to freeze." The walk back to the cabin was worse. The wind had shifted, blowing directly into her face. Snow accumulated on her eyelashes, in her scarf, inside her collar. She couldn't see the cabin until she was almost on top of it. Inside, she stripped off the wet outer layers and stood shivering by the fire. Her clothes steamed, water dripped from her hair. She was exhausted, and the day had barely started. This was what Rowan did every day. Not just surviving, maintaining life in a place designed to kill it. Clara ate cold beans from the night before, then spent the rest of the morning keeping the fire fed. She counted the wood on the porch, enough for 3 more days if she was careful, maybe 2 if the temperature kept dropping. By afternoon, the storm showed no signs of stopping. Clara pulled on the wet clothes again and fought her way back to the barn. The animals were fine, but the water had frozen solid again. She had to carry the buckets inside the cabin, let the ice melt by the fire, then carry them back out. 2 trips. 4 buckets. Her arms felt like they were going to fall off. That night, alone in the loft with wind howling outside, Clara thought about the ledgers, about the men hunting her. She'd worked for the Rocky Mountain Express Railroad for 3 years, keeping their books clean, balancing accounts, making sure everything looked legitimate to investors and regulators. She'd been good at her job, too good. Good enough to notice discrepancies, money disappearing from construction budgets, payments to shell companies that didn't exist. And then, one late night in the office, she'd found the real books. They detailed everything: bribes to land officials, payments to hired guns, specific names, dates, amounts. And buried in the numbers was something worse: a list of homesteaders who'd refused to sell their land. Next to each name was a date and a notation: resolved. She'd cross-referenced the dates. Every single one matched a newspaper report of a tragic accident: house fire, runaway wagon, hunting mishap, 14 families, 14 convenient deaths. Clara had stolen the ledgers that night, walked out of the office, and never went back. She'd bought a train ticket west with the last of her savings, changed her name, and answered the first mail-order marriage arrangement she could find. She thought she'd been careful, thought she'd covered her tracks, but men with that much money didn't leave loose ends. The storm lasted 3 days. On the morning of the 4th day, Clara woke to silence. The wind had stopped. She climbed down from the loft and opened the door to a world transformed. Snow had drifted against the cabin walls, some drifts higher than her head. The sky was clear and brutally blue. Sunlight sparkled off ice crystals, turning everything diamond bright. And the woodpile was almost gone. Clara counted what remained. Maybe enough for tonight if she was very, very lucky. Rowan had said he'd be back before she ran out. But what if the storm had caught him in the high country? What if he was hurt? What if he wasn't coming back? She looked at the forest beyond the barn. Plenty of deadfall wood out there. But the snow was waist deep, and she had no idea what she was doing. Do it anyway, she thought. You don't get to quit. She found Rowan's smaller axe in the barn, along with a coil of rope. She tied one end of the rope to the porch post, something she'd seen Rowan do before heading out in bad weather, a lifeline back to the cabin. Then she waded into the snow. It was harder than she'd imagined. The snow grabbed at her legs, soaked through her pants, worked its way into her boots. Every step was a fight. But she pushed forward, playing out rope behind her, looking for fallen branches. She found a dead pine 20 yards from the cabin, its branches dry and perfect for firewood. Clara chopped at the smaller limbs, her technique terrible but effective enough. The axe was heavy, her shoulders burned, blisters that had just started healing tore open again. She didn't stop. It took her 2 hours to cut and drag enough wood back to the cabin to last 2 days. Her hands were bleeding, her lungs felt raw from breathing frozen air. But when she stacked the wood on the porch and looked at what she'd accomplished, something fierce and proud moved through her chest. I did that, she thought. Me. That night, she cooked the last of the salt pork and rationed the beans. Food was getting low. If Rowan didn't come back soon, that would be the next problem to solve. But he would come back. He had to. On the 5th day, Claire was hauling water from the creek when she heard the sound. A deep, rumbling growl that made her blood turn to ice water. She froze, bucket in hand, and slowly turned her head. 30 feet away at the edge of the tree line stood the largest wolf she'd ever seen. It was gray and white, its fur thick with winter coat, its eyes pale yellow. It wasn't alone. 2 more appeared behind it, smaller but just as hungry looking. Claire's mind went blank with terror. She'd seen wolves before, from the train window, at a distance, made safely small by perspective. Up close they were different. They were real in a way that made her understand why people feared the wilderness. The lead wolf took a step forward. Its lips pulled back, showing teeth. Clara dropped the bucket and ran. She made it 5 steps before her foot caught a hidden root beneath the snow. She went down hard, face first into the drift. Snow filled her mouth and nose. She scrambled up, gasping, and saw the wolves were closer now. Moving fast, predator instinct triggered by fleeing prey. Clara's hand found something solid beneath the snow. A fallen branch, thick as her wrist. She grabbed it and swung as the lead wolf lunged. The branch connected with its shoulder. The wolf yelped and fell back, surprised more than hurt. But it gave Clara enough time to get her feet under her and start backing toward the cabin, branch held in front of her like a sword. The wolves circled, looking for an opening. Clara kept the branch moving, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She was 20 feet from the porch, then 15. The second wolf darted in from the side. Clara swung wild, missed. Teeth snapped inches from her leg. She stumbled backward, lost her footing again, and this time she knew she was dead. The rifle shot cracked across the clearing like thunder. Snow exploded near the lead wolf's feet. The pack scattered, disappearing into the trees so fast it was like they'd never been there. Clara sat in the snow, shaking, and looked up to see Rowan standing on the porch, rifle still raised to his shoulder. He lowered the gun slowly. "Get inside!" She scrambled to her feet and ran for the cabin. Rowan stayed outside, scanning the tree line until she was safely through the door. Then he followed, closing and barring it behind him. "You hurt?" he asked. Clara shook her head, not trusting her voice. "Let me see your leg." "It didn't bite me." "Let me see it anyway." She pulled up her pant leg. No blood, no torn fabric. The wolf had missed by inches. Rowan set the rifle against the wall. He looked exhausted. 3 days of hard travel in a storm showed on his face. His beard was crusted with ice. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. But he was alive. "You fed the animals?" he asked. "Twice a day." "Kept the fire going?" "Yes." "Where'd that wood on the porch come from?" "I didn't leave that much." Clara's hands were still shaking. "I cut it." He looked at her properly then, seeing the blisters, the raw patches on her face from windburn, the way she held herself like every muscle hurt. "You went out in the storm and cut wood," he said. "We were running out. You said not to let the fire die." Rowan walked to the fire and stood there, warming his hands. For a long time, he didn't speak. Clara waited, expecting anger or criticism or another lecture about how she wasn't built for this life. Instead, he said, "Coffee? I'll make some." "No, sit down. I'll do it." He made coffee while she sat at the table, still trembling from adrenaline. When he set a cup in front of her, the steam rising from it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. "The wolves," she said. "Have they been around before?" "They come down when game gets scarce in the high country. Usually they leave the homestead alone." He sat across from her. "Usually." "What's different this time?" "Hard winter coming. Animals can feel it before we can. They're desperate." Clara wrapped her hands around the cup, absorbing its warmth. "Will they come back?" "Probably." "What do we do?" "Keep the animals secured at night. Don't go outside unarmed. And if you see them again, don't run." He looked at her. "Running triggers the chase instinct. You run, you die." "You could have mentioned that before." "Didn't think I'd need to. Most people have enough sense not to challenge a wolf pack with a stick." "I wasn't challenging them. I was defending myself." "With a stick?" "It's what I had." The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. You've got guts. Stupid guts, but guts. Clara felt something loosen in her chest. Is that a compliment? It's an observation. They drank their coffee in silence. Outside, daylight was fading fast. Rowan got up and started preparing supper. Proper supper, not the burnt offerings Clara had been producing. He moved efficiently around the cabin, a man completely at ease in his space. You did good, he said, without looking at her. Keeping things going while I was gone. Those words shouldn't have meant so much. They were simple, practical, almost grudging, but Clara felt them settle in her chest like warmth from the fire. Thank you, she said quietly. They ate venison stew that Rowan made from meat he'd brought back from the trap lines. It was the best thing Clara had tasted in weeks. Afterward, Rowan went to check the animals one more time before full dark. Clara washed the dishes, then climbed to the loft. But sleep wouldn't come. She kept seeing those yellow eyes, those teeth, kept feeling the terror of knowing she was about to die. Below, she heard Rowan come back inside, bar the door, bank the fire, heard him settle on the bearskins by the hearth. The cabin creaked and settled around them. Clara? His voice came from below, quiet. Yes? You did more than good. I meant that. She closed her eyes. Good night, Rowan. Good night. The days that followed established a new rhythm. Rowan worked the trap lines, but he stayed closer to the homestead, checking them in day trips rather than overnight runs. Clara took over more of the daily work, feeding animals, hauling water, cooking, maintaining the cabin. They were learning each other's patterns, finding a way to share space without constantly colliding. Rowan still didn't talk much, but his silences felt less hostile now, more comfortable. One evening, he came back from the lines and found Clara trying to patch a hole in her pants using a needle and thread. That's not how you do it, he said. I'm managing. He took the pants from her. You're making it worse. His hands were huge, scarred and calloused, but they moved the needle with surprising precision. My mother made me learn. Said a man who couldn't mend his own clothes would freeze to death out of pure stupidity. Where is she now? Dead. 15 years back. He finished the patch and handed the pants back. Pneumonia took her. My father 6 months later just gave up, I think. Didn't want to be here without her. I'm sorry. He shrugged. It was a long time ago. Were you close? You and your mother? Close as anyone could be up here. She was tough. Had to be. Married to a mountain man and raising sons in the middle of nowhere. He paused. She would have liked you. Clara looked up, surprised. Why? Because you don't quit. That's what she valued most, stubbornness in the face of bad odds. He stood, moving to the window. She buried 2 babies before my brother and I survived our first winters. Lost another son when I was 10. He fell through ice on the creek. She could have left after that. My father would have taken her back to civilization if she'd asked. But she stayed. What? Said she'd made a promise to this place. To make it mean something. Rowan's voice was quiet. Leaving would have meant all that death was for nothing. Clara thought about that. About staying in a place that had taken so much from you, just to prove the taking hadn't won. What happened to your brother? She asked. The one whose clothes I'm wearing. Jacob. He left 8 years back. Said he couldn't stand the isolation anymore. Went to Denver last I heard. Haven't seen him since. Do you miss him? Sometimes. Rowan turned from the window. Mostly I'm just tired of talking about the past. He went to check the animals, leaving Clara alone with her thoughts. The next morning, she woke to find him standing by the table, staring at something in his hand. As she climbed down from the loft, she saw it was a letter. Where did that come from? She asked. Trapper came through yesterday. Brings mail up from town when the trail's passable. Rowan's face was hard. This is for you. Clara's blood went cold. What? He held out the letter. It was addressed to Clara Whitmore, care of Rowan Mercer's homestead. No return address. Her hand shook as she took it. How did anyone know I was here? That's what I'd like to know. She opened it with numb fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 2 lines written in neat script. We know where you are. We're coming. No signature, no details. Just those 6 words. Clara's legs went weak. She sat down hard in the chair. Who are they? Rowan asked. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. I told you, I needed a new start. Stop lying. He slammed his hand on the table, making her jump. Someone just threatened you at my homestead. That makes it my business. Who are they? Clara looked at his face. The anger there, yes, but also something else. Concern. Maybe even fear for her. She made a decision. Railroad men, she said quietly. Rocky Mountain Express. I worked for them as an accountant in Denver. I found evidence they were murdering homesteaders who wouldn't sell their land. I stole the proof and ran. Rowan stared at her. The ledgers. In your suitcase. She nodded. How many people are we talking about? 14 families that I know of, probably more. And the men hunting you? Hired guns. Professional killers. The company can't let me live, Rowan. If those ledgers become public, the railroad falls apart. Investors pull out. Government investigations. Criminal charges. She looked at him. They'll burn this whole mountain to find me. Rowan walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered clearing. When he spoke, his voice was measured. How long do we have? I don't know. The letter didn't say. The trapper who brought it? Did he see who gave it to him? I'll find out. He grabbed his coat and rifle. Stay inside, bar the door. Don't open it for anyone but me. Where are you going? To talk to Jake Morrison. He's got a place 2 miles south. He's the one who brings mail up. Rowan paused at the door. Those ledgers, they're the only reason you're alive right now, aren't they? The only reason they haven't just killed you already? Clara nodded. If I die, the evidence goes to federal authorities. I arranged it before I left Denver. A lawyer has instructions to open a sealed envelope if I don't check in every 3 months. Smart. He opened the door, then looked back. I'm not sending you away, Clara. Not before we figure this out. But when this is over, you're going to tell me everything. No more secrets. Okay. He left. Clara sat at the table, the letter in her hands, and felt the weight of her past crushing down on her present. She'd brought death to this mountain, to this man who'd done nothing but give her shelter when she had nowhere else to go. Rowan returned 2 hours later, his face grim. Morrison says a well-dressed man gave him the letter in town, paid him $5 to deliver it, no questions asked. He hung up his coat. The man had 2 others with him. All 3 were armed. Morrison said they looked like they meant business. They do. How many will they send? As many as it takes. Rowan nodded slowly, processing that. The nearest law is 4 days south. Even if we could get word to them, they won't come up here in winter for a property dispute. It's not a property dispute. It's murder. Try explaining that to a sheriff who's never seen evidence and won't risk his deputies in a blizzard. Rowan sat down across from her. We're on our own. Clara felt tears burning behind her eyes. I'm sorry, I should have told you, should have warned you before. Stop. His voice was hard but not cruel. You did what you had to do to survive. I understand that, but now we need to think tactically. What do you mean? I mean, this cabin is defensible. I built it that way. Thick walls, limited approaches, clear sight lines. The barn is a weakness, but we can shore that up. We've got weapons, ammunition, supplies. He leaned forward. And we've got time to prepare. They won't come until they're sure of their approach. These mountains kill people who don't know them. You're talking about fighting them. I'm talking about surviving them. There's a difference. Clara looked at this man she'd known for less than a month. This hard, scarred stranger who was now planning to risk his life for hers. Why? She asked. Why help me? You could tell them where the ledgers are, hand me over, and this all goes away. Rowan's jaw tightened. That's not who I am. You don't owe me anything. Maybe not. But I made a promise when I signed that contract, said I'd provide protection and shelter. That's what I'm doing. He stood. Besides, I don't like railroad men. They tried to run a line through this valley 5 years back. Wanted my land. When I wouldn't sell, they tried to force me out. Legal tricks, threats, all the usual tactics. What happened? I convinced them it wasn't worth the trouble. His hand unconsciously touched a scar on his forearm. They haven't been back since. Clara realized she was seeing a different side of Rowan now. Not just the mountain man surviving in isolation, but someone who'd fought before and knew how to win. Tell me about the ledgers, he said. Everything in them. I need to know what we're protecting. So she told him. The shell companies, the bribes, the list of dead homesteaders, the names of company executives who'd ordered the killings. As she spoke, Rowan's expression grew harder. These men, he said when she finished, the ones they killed, did they have families? Most of them. Wives, children. Clara's voice broke. I read the newspaper reports. House fires were the most common. Whole families burned alive in the night. Rowan stood and walked to the fireplace. He stared into the flames for a long time. We're keeping those ledgers safe, he said finally. And when this is over, we're making sure every word in them becomes public. Understood? Yes. Good. He turned to face her. Now let's get to work. They spent the next week fortifying the homestead. Rowan cut firing ports in the cabin walls, narrow slits that would let them shoot out while staying protected. He reinforced the door with extra planks and iron brackets. They moved supplies into the cabin: food, water, ammunition, medical materials. Clara learned to shoot. Rowan set up targets in the clearing and put his rifle in her hands. It's going to kick, he warned. Don't fight it. Let your body absorb the recoil. She fired. The rifle slammed into her shoulder hard enough to bruise. The shot went wide, kicking up snow 10 feet from the target. Again, Rowan said. She fired 20 times that day. By the end, she was hitting the target more often than not. Her shoulder was a mass of bruises, but she could work the rifle's action and reload without fumbling. You're not a marksman, Rowan said, but you're good enough to hit something man-sized at 50 yards. That'll do. They practiced different scenarios. What to do if attackers came from the south, the north, multiple directions at once, where to position themselves for best coverage, how to reload under pressure, what to do if the cabin caught fire. At night, they sat by the fire and Rowan told her about the mountain, its moods, its dangers, how to read weather and terrain. He was teaching her to survive not just the coming fight, but the wilderness itself. Why? Clara asked one evening. Why teach me all this? Because if something happens to me, you need to know how to make it out of here alive. Nothing's going to happen to you. Maybe not, but hope isn't a plan. Clara looked at him in the firelight. His face was all hard angles and scars, but there was something else there now when he looked at her. Something softer. I keep waiting for you to tell me this is too much trouble, she said, that I should just leave. Where would you go? I don't know. Somewhere they wouldn't find me. There's nowhere like that. Men with that kind of money and motivation, they'll find you eventually. Better to make a stand here where we control the ground. We, Clara repeated. You keep saying we. Rowan met her eyes. You're my wife. On paper, at least. That means something up here, even if it was just a business arrangement. He paused. And you've proven yourself. Most people would have quit by now. You didn't. That earns my respect. Clara felt something shift in her chest. This hard man was offering her something precious, not just protection, but partnership, recognition. Thank you, she said quietly. Don't thank me yet. This isn't over. But that night, for the first time since arriving, Rowan didn't sleep on the floor by the fire. He climbed to the loft carrying an extra bearskin. There's room for 2 up here, he said, and it's warmer. We need to conserve heat. It was practical, logical. But as Clara lay on one side of the loft and Rowan on the other, a careful distance between them, she felt the significance of the gesture. They were in this together now. Whatever came next, they'd face it as allies. Outside, winter deepened its grip. And somewhere in the distance, men with guns and bad intentions were coming closer. The wolves came back 3 nights later. Clara woke to the sound of the goats screaming. She was down the ladder before she was fully conscious, grabbing the rifle Rowan had left loaded by the door. He was already outside, standing on the porch in his long underwear, his own rifle raised. Stay inside, he called back without turning. She ignored him and stepped out into the freezing night. Moonlight turned the snow blue-white. Near the barn, shadows moved, 4 wolves this time, circling. One had its jaws locked on the barn door, trying to tear through the wood. Rowan fired. The shot echoed across the valley and the wolf at the door yelped and fell back. The others scattered but didn't run far. They paced at the edge of the clearing, yellow eyes catching the moonlight. They're starving, Rowan said. Game's disappeared from the high country. They'll keep coming back until they get what they want, or we kill them all. So we kill them. He looked at her, surprised. You sure about that? They're trying to destroy our livelihood. What choice do we have? Rowan nodded slowly. All right. You take the left side of the clearing. I'll take the right. Don't shoot unless you're sure of your target. They separated, moving to opposite ends of the porch. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. The rifle felt heavy in her hands. Cold bit through her clothes, but she barely felt it. One of the wolves broke from the tree line, racing toward the barn. Clara tracked it, exhaled, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked. The wolf tumbled sideways into the snow and didn't get up. Good shot, Rowan said. Another wolf charged from his side. His rifle cracked and it went down. The remaining two hesitated, then melted back into the forest. Rowan waited 5 minutes, watching the trees before he lowered his rifle. They'll be back. Wolves don't give up easy when they're this hungry. Neither do we. He glanced at her. In the moonlight, his expression was hard to read. No, we don't. They dragged the dead wolves away from the homestead and checked the barn. The door was scored with claw marks, but intact. The animals inside were terrified, but unharmed. Back in the cabin, Claire's hands started shaking. Reaction setting in. She'd just killed a living thing, 2 living things, if she counted the one from before. Rowan took the rifle from her and set it aside, then pressed a cup of whiskey into her hands. Drink. She did. The liquor burned going down, but it steadied her. You did what needed doing, he said. Don't overthink it. I'm not. You are. I can see it on your face. He sat across from her. Taking a life is never easy, even an animal's life. But sometimes it's necessary. You understand that now. Clara looked at him. How many men have you killed? The question hung in the air between them. 3, Rowan said finally. 2 were trying to rob me on a trail south of here. The 3rd was the railroad's hired muscle when they came for my land. Do you regret it? No, they made their choices. I made mine. He paused. But I remember every one. That's the price you pay. Will it be the same when the railroad men come? Probably worse. They'll be better armed, better trained, and they won't stop until one of us is dead. His eyes met hers. Are you ready for that? Clara thought about the families in the ledgers, the burned houses, the murdered children. Yes. Then get some sleep. We've got work to do tomorrow. But sleep didn't come easily. Clara lay in the loft, listening to Rowan's breathing on the other side of the space between them, and wondered what kind of person she was becoming. A month ago, she'd been an accountant in Denver. Now she was a woman who could shoot wolves without hesitation and talk about killing men like it was inevitable. The mountain was changing her, or maybe it was just revealing who she'd always been underneath. 2 days later, Jake Morrison showed up again. Rowan saw him coming from a distance and had his rifle ready when the trapper reached the clearing. Morrison raised his hand, showing he was unarmed. Just bringing news, Mercer. No trouble. What news? Morrison glanced at the cabin where Clara stood watching from a firing port. Maybe we should talk private. She hears everything. Talk. The trapper shifted uncomfortably. There's men in town asking questions about you. About your wife specifically. They're offering money for information. Where exactly your cabin is, how to reach it, what kind of defenses you might have. How many men? 5 that I saw, could be more. They're well equipped, professional. Morrison lowered his voice. Look, I know it's not my business, but whatever trouble your wife brought with her, these ain't the kind of men who give up easy. I know what kind of men they are. Do you? Because they're saying she's a thief, that she stole property from the railroad and they just want it back. Some folks in town are thinking maybe they should help. Rowan's jaw tightened. Which folks? Tommy Chen at the general store is one. He's still bitter about you breaking his brother's arm last year. Morrison shrugged. Just thought you should know. Watch your back. After Morrison left, Clara came out onto the porch. How long do we have? A week. Maybe less if they're smart and wait for good weather. Rowan looked at the sky. Storm's coming in tomorrow. That'll slow them down. And after the storm? After the storm, we find out if all this preparation was worth it. That night, they went through their supplies one more time. Ammunition, food, water, medical materials. Rowan had prepared as well as he could, but there were gaps. Not enough bullets if the fight lasted more than a few hours. Not enough food if they got pinned down for days. We should hide the ledgers, Clara said. Somewhere they won't find them even if they take the cabin. Where? She thought about it. The creek. There's that overhang where you showed me how to catch fish. We could wrap them in oilcloth and hide them under the rocks. Rowan nodded. Smart. If something happens to both of us, Morrison might find them eventually. He checks that spot for his own traps sometimes. You're talking about dying again. I'm talking about being realistic. Clara walked to where he stood by the window. I won't let you die for me, Rowan. It's not your choice to make. Then make me a promise. If it comes down to it, if you can escape and I can't, you leave me and get out. Take the ledgers and make sure they reach someone who can use them. No. Rowan, I said no. He turned to face her, and his expression was fierce. I don't leave people behind, not when they're depending on me. That's not who I am. Even if staying means dying. Even then. They stood close enough that Clara could feel heat radiating from his body. The cabin suddenly felt very small, very intimate. Something had shifted between them over the past weeks, a connection forged through shared danger and survival. She saw it in the way he looked at her now, not as a burden or a mistake, but as someone worth protecting. Why? She asked quietly. Why does it matter so much to you? Rowan was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. Because I spent 20 years alone on this mountain, 20 years of silence and isolation and convincing myself I didn't need anyone. Then you showed up, terrified and completely unprepared and lying through your teeth, and you reminded me what it feels like to have something worth fighting for. Clara's breath caught. Rowan, I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. I know this started as business, a contract, but it's become something else for me, and I needed you to know that before... He trailed off. Before we might die. Yeah. Clara reached out and took his hand. His fingers were rough and scarred, twice the size of hers, but they closed around her hand gently. It's become something else for me, too. They stood like that in the lamplight, hands joined, while outside the wind began to pick up. The storm Morrison had mentioned was rolling in. We should sleep, Rowan said finally, while we can. But that night, the careful distance they'd maintained in the loft disappeared. Clara lay close enough to feel Rowan's warmth, and when his arm came around her shoulders, she didn't pull away. She settled against him, feeling safe for the first time since leaving Denver. Whatever happens, she whispered, thank you for everything. His arm tightened around her. Don't thank me yet. The storm hit at dawn, as vicious as any they'd seen. Snow fell so thick that visibility dropped to nothing. Wind howled around the cabin like something alive and angry. It was the kind of storm that killed people caught outside. It was also the kind of storm that would delay the railroad men. Rowan and Clara spent the day inside, maintaining the fire and going over their defensive plans one more time. Rowan sketched a rough map of the homestead on a piece of paper, marking potential approach routes and defensive positions. They'll probably try to surround us, he said. Cut off any escape. Standard tactics. What if they try to burn us out? That's the biggest risk. If the cabin catches fire, we retreat to the barn and make a stand there. It's not as defensible, but it's better than burning alive. Clara studied the map. What about using the terrain? These gullies here and here, could we use them to our advantage? Rowan looked at her with something like pride. You're thinking like a tactician now. I'm thinking like someone who wants to live. Same thing. He marked the gullies on the map. If we can lure some of them into the ravine on the north side, we'd have high ground advantage. But it's risky. We'd have to split up. I can handle it. I know you can. That's not the question. He set down the pencil. The question is whether I can handle watching you put yourself in danger. You don't have a choice. Neither of us do. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of being trapped inside with nothing to do but wait and think and prepare. By the third day, they were both tense as wire, snapping at each other over small things, and then apologizing immediately. On the fourth day, the storm broke. Rowan went outside to check for tracks, any sign that someone had approached during the whiteout. He found wolf prints near the barn, but nothing human. We're clear for now, he said when he came back inside. But the trail from town will be passable in a day or two. So they'll come soon. Yeah. That afternoon, they hid the ledgers as Clara had suggested. Rowan wrapped them carefully in oilcloth, then placed them in a metal box he used for trapping supplies. They trudged through waist-deep snow to the creek and wedged the box under the overhang, covering it with rocks and debris until it was invisible. "Even if they tear the cabin apart, they won't find them," Rowan said. Walking back, Clara felt lighter. The evidence was safe. Whatever happened now, the truth would survive. That night they made love for the first time. There was nothing smooth or romantic about it. They came together with the desperate urgency of two people who might not survive the week, all rough hands and urgent need and the fierce desire to feel alive while they still could. Afterward, they lay tangled in the bearskins, breathing hard, their bodies slick with sweat despite the cold. "I should have done that weeks ago," Rowan said. Clara laughed, surprised by the sound. "We were barely speaking weeks ago." "Exactly. Would have been easier than all the talking." She hit his shoulder lightly. "You're terrible at this." "At what?" "Romance. Pillow talk. Any of it." Never claimed otherwise. But he pulled her closer, his hand gentle on her back. "I'm better at other things." "Yes, you are." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and for a few hours Clara let herself forget about everything except the warmth of his body and the steady beat of his heart. The railroad men arrived on the 6th day. Rowan spotted them from a distance. 5 riders on horseback, moving carefully up the trail. They stopped about a mile from the cabin, at a point where the trail split. Even from this distance, Rowan could see they were professional. Good horses, good equipment, and they moved with military precision. "They're here," he said quietly. Clara joined him at the window. Her face was pale but set with determination. "How many?" "5 that I can see. Could be more hanging back." They watched the men make camp at the trail junction. Smart positioning, close enough to strike quickly, far enough to be out of rifle range. These weren't hired thugs. They were experienced hunters. "What now?" Clara asked. "Now we wait. Let them make the first move." But the first move didn't come that day, or the next. The men stayed at their camp, clearly visible from the cabin, but they didn't advance. It was a psychological tactic, Rowan realized. Making them wait, building tension, hoping they'd make a mistake. "They're trying to spook us," he said on the second day. "It's working." "Don't let it. They want us scared and sloppy. We stay sharp." On the third day, one rider came forward. He stopped at the edge of rifle range and called out, his voice carrying across the snow. "Rowan Mercer, we just want to talk." Rowan appeared on the porch, rifle in hand. "Then talk." "We're looking for Clara Hastings. She's got property that belongs to the Rocky Mountain Express Railroad. Return it, and we leave peacefully." "There's no one here by that name." The rider was silent for a moment. "Come now, Mercer, we know she's there. The woman you married from Denver. Just hand over the documents and this ends without bloodshed." "I don't have any documents. We can make this easy or hard. Your choice." Rowan raised his rifle and fired. The shot kicked up snow 10 feet in front of the rider's horse. The animal reared, nearly throwing its rider. "That's my answer," Rowan shouted. "Come take what you want if you think you can." The rider wheeled his horse and galloped back to camp. Rowan stayed on the porch, watching until Clara touched his arm. "That was a declaration of war," she said. "It was always going to be war. Now they know where we stand." That night, they fortified their positions. Rowan moved extra ammunition to the firing ports. Clara filled buckets with snow to fight fires. They ate a cold supper, not wanting smoke from cooking to give away their exact position in the dark. "They'll come tonight," Rowan said, "under cover of darkness." "How do you know?" "Because that's when I'd come. New moon, good cover, and we're expecting them. They'll want to hit before we're ready." He was right. At midnight, the first shots rang out. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness from 3 different directions. Bullets punched through the shutters, thudded into the log walls. Rowan and Clara took their positions at opposite firing ports and returned fire. Clara's hands were steady as she worked the rifle's action. Sight, breathe, squeeze, reload. She couldn't see what she was shooting at, just muzzle flashes in the dark, but she kept firing, keeping the attackers from advancing. Beside her, Rowan fired with mechanical precision, each shot deliberate. "North side," he called. "2 coming up the gully." Clara swung her rifle to cover that approach. She saw shadows moving through the snow and fired. One shadow fell. The other dropped flat and returned fire. Bullets splintered the shutter next to her face. The fight lasted 20 minutes. Then, as suddenly as it started, the shooting stopped. Silence fell, broken only by the ringing in their ears. "Everyone alive?" Rowan called. "Yes," Clara gasped. Her shoulder throbbed from the rifle's recoil. "You?" "I'm good. Stay sharp. This might just be the opening round." He was right again. An hour later, they came again, this time with fire. Burning arrows arced through the darkness, landing on the roof against the walls. Rowan had prepared for this. The roof was covered with snow and wouldn't catch easily, but the porch caught fire. "Water!" he shouted. Clara grabbed a bucket and dumped it on the flames while Rowan covered her, firing at the shadows beyond the firelight. The flames hissed and died, but more arrows came. The whole front of the cabin was lit up now, making them perfect targets. "We can't stay here," Clara yelled over the gunfire. "Barn, move!" They grabbed their rifles and ammunition and ran. Bullets chased them across the snow. Clara felt one whistle past her ear so close it burned. She dove through the barn door and rolled, coming up with her rifle ready. Rowan was right behind her, slamming the door and barring it. "You hit?" "No. You?" "I'm fine." He moved to a gap between the boards and peered out. "They're advancing. 4 of them, maybe 5. "Where's the 5th man?" As if in answer, something heavy hit the barn's back wall. Then came the smell. Lamp oil. "They're going to burn us out," Clara said. Rowan's face was grim. "That's the plan." Smoke started seeping through the walls. The animals panicked, mules kicking, goats bleeding. Rowan made a split-second decision. "We let them out. The animals will create chaos. We use that to break through their line." "That's insane." "You got a better idea?" Clara didn't. Rowan opened the animal stalls, then grabbed the blasting powder he kept for clearing stumps. He'd brought it to the barn during their preparations, hoping he wouldn't need it. Now he packed it against the back wall, near where the fire was starting. "When I blow this, we go through the hole. Fast and hard. Don't stop for anything." He lit the fuse and they pressed themselves against the side wall. The explosion was deafening. The back wall blew outward in a shower of splintered wood. Smoke and fire billowed. The animals stampeded through the gap. "Now!" Rowan roared. They ran through the smoke and chaos. Clara saw a man ahead, trying to control his panicked horse. She fired without thinking. He fell. Rowan was beside her, shooting at shadows, clearing their path. They made it to the tree line. Behind them, the barn was fully ablaze now, lighting up the night. The cabin was burning too, flames reaching toward the sky. Everything they'd built was turning to ash, but they were alive. Rowan pulled her deeper into the forest, moving fast through terrain he knew by heart. Shots followed them, but the shooters were firing blind now, disoriented by the explosions and the burning buildings. They ran for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Finally, Rowan stopped in a dense stand of pine and pulled Clara down beside him. "Stay quiet," he whispered. "Listen." They listened. Voices carried through the trees, men calling to each other, organizing. But the voices were confused, angry. The explosion had thrown them off. "How many did we get?" Clara whispered. 2 for sure, maybe a third, but there's still at least 2 out there, and they know these woods now. "What do we do?" Rowan's face was hard in the dim light filtering through the trees. "We hunt them before they hunt us." He moved through the forest like a ghost, and Clara followed, trying to match his silence. They circled wide, using the terrain and darkness to their advantage. Rowan was in his element now. This was his mountain, his territory. They found the first man by his cigarette. He was standing watch at the edge of the clearing, smoking while the buildings burned behind him. Stupid mistake. The orange glow made him a perfect target. Rowan didn't hesitate. His rifle cracked once, and the man went down. "One left," he said. "The leader. He'll be the smartest, the most dangerous." They spent an hour searching, moving carefully, checking every shadow. The burning buildings cast dancing light through the trees, making everything uncertain. Finally, they heard movement ahead. Someone trying to move quietly, but not quite managing it. Rowan held up his hand. "Wait." The man came into view, tall, well-dressed even in trail clothes, carrying an expensive rifle. He was moving toward where they'd hidden the ledgers by the creek. Someone must have talked, given up the location. Rowan and Clara moved to flank him. They had the high ground, the element of surprise. But as they positioned themselves, the man's head snapped up. He'd sensed something. "Mercer," he called. "I know you're there. Let's talk like civilized people." Rowan didn't answer. The man continued, his voice reasonable, educated. My name is William Blackwood. I work for the railroad, but I'm not just hired muscle. I'm here to make you an offer, a generous one. Still, Rowan remained silent. $50,000, Blackwood said. Cash. For the ledgers and your silence. You and your wife can disappear, start fresh anywhere you want. Nobody has to die tonight. Clara looked at Rowan. In the firelight, his face was stone. I know you're a practical man, Mercer, Blackwood continued. This isn't your fight. Why die for someone else's crusade? Take the money. Live your life. Rowan finally spoke, his voice carrying through the trees. How many families did you kill? Blackwood went still. The ledgers list 14, Rowan said, but I'm guessing there were more. How many, Blackwood? That's business. Nothing personal. Tell that to the children you burned alive. They were obstacles. Sometimes obstacles need to be removed for progress to happen. Blackwood's voice hardened. You're an obstacle now, Mercer. Don't make me remove you too. Try it. Blackwood raised his rifle, scanning the trees. Last chance. Take the deal. Rowan's answer was a bullet that kicked up snow at Blackwood's feet. The railroad man dove for cover and returned fire, his shot splintering trees around them. The fight was brutal and close. Blackwood was good, trained, experienced, and fighting for his life. He used the terrain well, forcing Rowan and Clara to split up, trying to isolate them. But he didn't know the mountain like Rowan did. Rowan circled wide, using a ravine to mask his approach. Clara kept Blackwood pinned down, trading shots, making him focus on her position. She was terrified, her hands shaking, but she kept firing. Rowan came up behind Blackwood's position, moving silent as death. When he was close enough, he spoke. Drop it. Blackwood spun, bringing his rifle around. Rowan fired first. The shot took Blackwood in the chest, and he went down hard, his rifle falling into the snow. Rowan approached carefully, rifle ready. But Blackwood was done. Blood spread across his expensive coat, dark in the firelight. The ledgers, Blackwood gasped. Where? Somewhere you'll never find them, Rowan said. Blackwood laughed, a wet, awful sound. Doesn't matter, I'm not the last. They'll keep sending people. The railroad doesn't forgive, doesn't forget. Neither do I. Blackwood's eyes glazed over. His last breath rattled out across the snow. Clara appeared beside Rowan, her rifle still raised. She looked down at the dead man and felt nothing. No guilt, no triumph, just exhaustion. It's over, she said. This part is. They walked back toward the homestead. The barn was gone, just smoldering ruins. The cabin was a skeleton of charred logs, still burning in places. Everything they'd worked for, everything Rowan had built over 15 years, was ash and smoke. Clara felt tears burn her eyes. I'm so sorry. Your home was just a building, Rowan said quietly. We're alive. That's what matters. They stood in the snow, watching the ruins burn as dawn began to break over the mountains. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. The sound was lonely and wild and strangely appropriate. What now? Clara asked. Rowan pulled her close, his arm around her shoulders. Now we finish this. We get those ledgers to someone who can use them. Make sure every death in those books counts for something. And after? After we come back here and rebuild. From the ground up if we have to. Clara leaned into him, feeling his warmth, his strength. Together? Yeah, Rowan said. Together. The sun rose over the smoking ruins, turning the snow pink and gold. Rowan and Clara stood in what had been the cabin's main room, now just charred logs and ash. The stone fireplace still stood, blackened but intact, a monument to what had been. The animals, Clara said suddenly. We let them out. They could be anywhere. They won't go far. Mules are smart enough to stick close to where they know food is. Rowan kicked at a burned timber. We'll round them up after we deal with the bodies. There were 5 corpses scattered around the homestead. Rowan went through their pockets methodically, his face showing nothing. He found money, ammunition, and papers identifying them as railroad security contractors. One had a telegram folded in his coat. Rowan read it, then handed it to Clara. The message was brief. Recover documents. Eliminate witnesses. No survivors. They weren't planning to let either of us walk away, Clara said. I know. Rowan pocketed the telegram. This is evidence. proves the railroad sent them. They spent the next 2 hours dragging bodies to the edge of the property. The ground was too frozen to dig graves, so Rowan piled rocks over them. It wasn't respectful exactly, but it kept the wolves from getting at them. "We should check their camp," Claire said when they finished. "They had supplies, horses. We'll need both for the trip to Denver." The camp at the trail junction was still intact. The railroad men had traveled well equipped: tents, food stores, ammunition, and 5 good horses tied to a picket line. Rowan and Clara loaded what they could carry onto 2 of the horses and set the others loose. In a few days, they'd wander down to Morrison's place or one of the other homesteads, where someone would claim them. Back at the ruins, they found 3 of the 4 animals. The mules, Brutus and Sarah, were huddled near the barn's remains. 1 goat was with them, the other was gone, probably killed in the chaos. "At least we didn't lose them all," Clara said, scratching Brutus behind the ears. The big mule leaned into her touch, and something about that simple gesture of trust made her eyes burn with tears she refused to shed. They made a temporary camp in the barn's stone foundation, where one wall still provided some wind protection. Rowan built a fire using timber from the ruins. They ate food from the railroad men's supplies: salt pork, hardtack, coffee that was better than anything Rowan had ever bought. "Bastards ate well while hunting people," he muttered. Clara sat close to the fire, her rifle across her knees. She hadn't put it down since the fight ended. "What's our next move?" "We get the ledgers and head for Denver. 4 days hard riding if the weather holds. The railroad has people everywhere. The moment we show up, we don't show up. Not openly." Rowan poured coffee into 2 tin cups. "I know a federal marshal in Denver, man named Samuel Garrett. He's honest, which is rare for that city. We get the ledgers to him. He'll know what to do with them." "You trust him?" "As much as I trust anyone." Rowan handed her a cup. "He tried to recruit me as a deputy once, back when I still went to town regular. Said I had the right temperament for law work." "What did you tell him?" "That I'd rather freeze to death alone than deal with people's problems for a living." Rowan almost smiled. "He said the offer stood if I changed my mind." They drank their coffee and watched the sun climb higher. Smoke still rose from the cabin ruins. The smell of burned wood hung in the air, mixing with pine scent from the surrounding forest. "I destroyed your life," Clara said quietly. "You didn't pull the trigger. They did. But they came because of me, because of what I took." Rowan set down his cup. "You took evidence of murder. That's not a crime, Clara. That's courage. What they did to those families, that's the crime. Don't get those things confused." "It doesn't change what happened here." "No, it doesn't." He looked at the ruins. "But this was always temporary. Buildings burn, land doesn't. I can rebuild." "Why would you want to? After everything is shot?" "Because this is my home. Has been for 20 years. I'm not letting railroad killers chase me off my own mountain." His voice was firm. "And because I'm not doing it alone this time." Clara met his eyes. In the morning light, she could see the exhaustion there, the pain he wouldn't voice. But she also saw determination. This man didn't break. He bent, adapted, survived. "We should move soon," she said, "before anyone else comes looking." "Agreed. We'll rest a few hours, tend the animals, then head out at dusk. Traveling at night is risky, but it's better than being spotted on the trail." They spent the afternoon salvaging what they could from the ruins. Clara found her suitcase, charred but intact. Inside, her few clothes were ruined, but the false bottom she'd built was still there. Empty now, since the ledgers were safe by the creek. Rowan recovered some tools from the barn wreckage, along with several traps and his best skinning knife. Not much, but enough to start over when the time came. At the creek, they retrieved the metal box. The ledgers inside were undamaged, still dry in their oilcloth wrapping. Clara held them for a moment, feeling their weight. These books had cost so much already. They'd cost more before this was finished. "You ever think about just burning them?" Rowan asked. "Walking away, letting the railroad win?" "Every day since I took them." "But you won't?" "No." Clara put the ledgers in a saddlebag. "Those families deserve justice, even if it's too late to save them." They left at sunset, riding south on the trail toward civilization. Rowan led on one of the railroad horses, a sturdy bay gelding. Clara followed on a smaller roan mare, with Brutus and Sarah trailing behind on lead ropes. They moved slowly, carefully, Rowan reading the trail for signs of more danger. The first night they camped in a shallow cave Rowan knew, hidden from the trail. They didn't light a fire. Too risky. They ate cold food and slept in shifts, one always watching while the other rested. Clara woke in the small hours to find Rowan sitting at the cave entrance, silhouetted against starlight. She moved to sit beside him. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Thinking." "About what?" "About how quiet it is." He gestured at the darkness. "Out here, away from the homestead, no responsibilities, no one depending on me, just the trail and the next mile." "You miss it, being alone." "Sometimes," he glanced at her, "but not as much as I thought I would." They sat in comfortable silence, shoulders touching. Clara thought about Denver, about what waited for them there. Federal marshals and courtrooms, newspapers and politicians, a world she'd run from and now had to run toward. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Good. Means you're thinking clearly. What if the marshal doesn't believe us? What if the railroad has already bought him? Then we find someone else. Keep going until we find someone who can't be bought." Rowan's voice was steady. "The truth is on our side. That counts for something." "Does it?" "Those families had truth on their side. It didn't save them." "No, but they didn't have evidence. We do." He turned to look at her fully, and they were alone. "We're not." Clara leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "When this is over, if we survive, what happens to us? What do you want to happen?" She thought about that. "I want to go back to the mountain. Help you rebuild. Make a real life there, not just a survival arrangement." "That what you really want? Or are you just saying it because it's what I want to hear?" "It's what I really want." She met his eyes. "I'm not the same person who stepped off that train. The mountain changed me. You changed me. I don't want to go back to being that frightened woman hiding in cities." Rowan nodded slowly. "All right then. We make it through this. We go home. Together." "Together," Clara echoed. The second day of travel brought them through rougher country. The trail narrowed, winding through steep-walled canyons where ambush would be easy. Rowan was tense, hand never far from his rifle, eyes constantly scanning. They saw no one. The winter kept most travelers off the high trails. But late in the afternoon, they found tracks, multiple horses, moving north toward Rowan's homestead. "More railroad men," Rowan said, dismounting to examine the tracks. "4 riders, maybe 5. These are fresh, 6 hours old at most. They're going to find the bodies. And the ruins. They'll know what happened." Rowan remounted. "We need to move faster." They pushed the horses harder, covering ground quickly despite the rough terrain. As darkness fell, they descended into lower elevations where the snow was lighter and the trail easier. They made camp in a dense stand of pine, taking turns on watch again. On Clara's watch, around midnight, she heard something moving in the darkness. Not an animal. The sound was wrong, too deliberate. She touched Rowan's shoulder and he woke instantly, hand on his rifle. They waited, listening. The sound came again, closer. Footsteps in snow. Rowan brought the rifle to his shoulder, aiming at the darkness. "Show yourself, or I start shooting." "Don't shoot, Mercer. It's Morrison." The trapper emerged from the trees, hands raised, looking exhausted and frightened. "Thank hell I found you." "What are you doing out here?" Rowan demanded. "Running, same as you." Morrison collapsed near their small fire. "More railroad men came through town yesterday. 8 of them this time. They're asking hard questions, threatening people. Tommy Chen told them about me bringing that letter, about me knowing where your cabin was." "Did you tell them anything else?" "No, I swear. But they're offering serious money for information. Someone's going to talk eventually." Morrison looked between them. "You need to get out of this territory. These men aren't stopping until they find what they're looking for." "We're heading to Denver," Clara said, "to a federal marshal." Morrison laughed bitterly. "The railroad owns half the marshals in Denver. You walk into that city, you're walking into a trap." Rowan's jaw tightened. "Garrett's honest." "Maybe, but can you get to him before the railroad gets to you?" Morrison shook his head. "They've got eyes everywhere down there. Telegraph operators, hotel clerks, even the damn stable boys. You show up asking for a federal marshal, they'll know within the hour." "Then what do you suggest?" Clara asked. Morrison pulled out a folded newspaper from his coat. I picked this up in town before I ran. You need to see it. The paper was a Denver Post from 3 days ago. On the front page was an article about a crusading journalist named Catherine Walsh, who'd been investigating railroad corruption for months. She'd published a series of exposés about bribery and fraud, and according to the article, she was planning something bigger. Walsh has connections, Morrison said, political ones. She's the daughter of a state senator, so the railroad can't just make her disappear. Get your evidence to her. She'll know what to do with it. Rowan studied the article. Where do we find her? Her office is on Larimer Street, above a print shop. But like I said, Denver's dangerous for you now. You'll need to be smart. We'll manage. Morrison stood. I'm heading west, over the mountains into Utah territory, putting distance between me and this whole mess. I'd suggest you do the same after you deliver those ledgers. He looked at Clara. I'm sorry I brought you that letter. If I'd known what it would start... You couldn't have known, Clara said. This isn't your fault. After Morrison disappeared back into the darkness, Rowan and Clara sat by the dying fire. A journalist, Clara said. That could work. Or it could get us killed faster. Rowan poked at the embers. But it's better than walking blind into a marshal's office. They broke camp before dawn and rode hard. By the third day, they reached the outskirts of Denver. The city sprawled across the plains, a maze of streets and buildings that looked alien after weeks in the mountains. Smoke from 1,000 chimneys hazed the air. The noise of civilization, wagon wheels, shouting voices, steam whistles, was almost overwhelming. They found a cheap stable on the edge of town and paid to board the horses. The stable owner barely looked at them, which was good. They needed to be invisible. We need different clothes, Rowan said, looking down at his mountain gear. We look like exactly what we are, people running from something. They found a second-hand shop and bought city clothes. For Rowan, a plain suit that fit poorly across his broad shoulders. For Clara, a simple dress and coat that wouldn't draw attention. They changed in the back of the shop, and when Clara saw Rowan in the ill-fitting suit, she almost laughed. I look ridiculous, he said. You look like a banker having a bad day. That's worse than ridiculous. They made their way toward Larimer Street, moving through crowds that parted around Rowan's bulk. Clara kept the saddlebag containing the ledgers close to her body, hand inside her coat near the pistol Rowan had given her. The print shop was easy to find. Catherine Walsh's office was up a narrow staircase through a door marked Denver Investigative Press. Rowan knocked. It's open, a woman's voice called. They entered a cramped office filled with papers, books, and the acrid smell of ink. A woman sat at a desk covered in documents, scribbling notes. She was perhaps 40, with graying hair pulled back severely and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. I'm not buying whatever you're selling, she said without looking up. We're not selling, Clara said. We have information about the Rocky Mountain Express Railroad. The woman's pen stopped. She looked up slowly, her gaze assessing them both. What kind of information? Clara set the saddlebag on the desk and pulled out the ledgers. The kind that proves they've been murdering homesteaders for land rights. Catherine Walsh stared at the ledgers, then at Clara, then back at the ledgers. Slowly, she closed the door to her office and locked it. Sit down, she said, and start from the beginning. They talked for 2 hours. Clara explained how she'd found the ledgers, what they contained, why she'd run. Rowan described the attacks on his homestead, the dead railroad men, the evidence they'd collected. Walsh listened intently, occasionally asking sharp questions, taking notes in precise handwriting. When they finished, she opened one of the ledgers and began reading. Her expression grew darker with each page. This is extensive, she said finally. Names, dates, payment amounts. It's all here. She looked at Claire. Do you understand what you're holding? This isn't just evidence of murder. This is proof of systematic corruption going all the way to the territorial legislature. Can you use it? Rowan asked. Can I use it? This is the story I've been chasing for 2 years. Walsh's eyes gleamed. But it's also dangerous. The railroad will do anything to suppress this. They already tried, Clara said. We're still here. Walsh studied them both. This odd pair, clearly exhausted, clearly desperate. You realize you can't stay in Denver. The moment I publish this, they'll know where the evidence came from. They'll come after you. We know, Rowan said. Where will you go? Back to the mountains. Let them come find us there if they want. Walsh nodded slowly. All right, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to copy every page of these ledgers tonight. I have connections at 3 different newspapers, the Post, the Tribune, and the Rocky Mountain News. Tomorrow morning, all 3 will run the story simultaneously. The railroad won't be able to suppress it if it's everywhere at once. What about the marshal? Claire asked. Samuel Garrett? I know Garrett. He's honest, but he's also cautious. He won't move without ironclad evidence. Walsh tapped the ledgers. This is ironclad. Once the story breaks, he'll have the political cover to launch an investigation. The railroad's executives won't be able to hide. How long do we need to stay in the city? Rowan asked. You don't. Leave tonight. Get as far away as possible before this explodes. Walsh stood. Give me 4 hours to copy everything. Then take the originals and disappear. I'll handle the rest. They left Walsh's office as the sun set over Denver. The city was lighting up, gas lamps, building windows, the glow from saloons and theaters. It should have felt alive and exciting. Instead, it felt like a trap waiting to spring. We should find food, Clara said, a real meal before we go. They found a quiet restaurant off the main street and ordered steak and potatoes. The food was good, probably the best Clara had eaten in months, but she barely tasted it. She kept watching the door, expecting armed men to burst through. Relax, Rowan said. No one knows we're here. You don't know that. I know that sitting here looking terrified draws more attention than eating normally. He cut his steak. We're just 2 people having dinner. That's all anyone sees. Clara tried to match his calm, but her hand shook when she lifted her fork. Everything they'd fought for came down to whether Catherine Walsh could be trusted, whether the newspapers would actually publish, whether justice meant anything in a world where money bought silence. They were finishing their meal when Clara saw him, a well-dressed man standing across the street, watching the restaurant. He wasn't trying to hide. He wanted them to see him. Rowan, she said quietly. Across the street. Rowan looked. His expression didn't change, but his hand moved under the table, finding the pistol at his belt. Back door? Through the kitchen, probably. On my signal, we move. Fast and quiet. The man across the street raised his hand and 2 more men appeared from the shadows. They started crossing toward the restaurant. Now, Rowan said. They stood and walked quickly toward the kitchen. A waiter tried to intercept them, but Rowan shoved past. The kitchen was hot and chaotic, full of cooks and steam. They ran through it, ignoring shouts, and burst out the back door into an alley. Gunfire erupted behind them. Bullets punched through the wooden door. They ran, feet slipping on icy cobblestones. Behind them, they heard pursuit. Multiple men, moving fast. Rowan pulled Clara into a narrow gap between buildings. They pressed themselves against the wall, breathing hard. Footsteps pounded past their hiding spot. They knew, Clara whispered. Someone told them we were here. Doesn't matter. We need to reach the stable, get the horses, and get out of this city. They moved through back alleys, staying off main streets. Twice more they heard searchers, men calling to each other, coordinating. The railroad had mobilized fast. At the stable, they found their horses saddled and ready. The stable owner was gone, his office dark. On the ground near the horses lay a body. The owner, throat cut, eyes staring at nothing. They killed him for helping us, Clara said, horror in her voice. They killed him to send a message. Rowan checked the horses quickly. They want us scared. Want us making mistakes. It's working. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. He handed her the reins to the roan. We ride north, hard and fast. Don't stop for anything. They mounted and rode out of the stable at a gallop. Behind them, shouts erupted as their pursuers spotted them. Gunfire cracked through the night. Clara bent low over her horse's neck, urging it faster. They tore through Denver's streets, scattering pedestrians, jumping over obstacles. Rowan led them through a maze of turns, losing their pursuers in the warren of back streets. Finally, they broke free of the city limits and hit the open trail. They rode for hours, pushing the horses to their limits. Only when they were miles from Denver did Rowan finally slow to a walk. We need to circle back, Clara said, breathing hard. The ledgers, Walsh needs more time. Walsh has the copies. That's what matters. The originals are safer with us than in that city. But the story will break tomorrow morning, whether we're there or not. Rowan looked back toward Denver's distant lights. Our part's done. Now we survive long enough to see it through. They rode through the night, angling northwest toward the mountains. As dawn broke, they stopped at a creek to water the horses. Clara was exhausted, running on nothing but adrenaline and fear. "How many do you think are chasing us?" she asked. "All of them. The railroad knows we're the key." "Kill us." The story becomes questionable. Maybe we fabricated the ledgers. Maybe we're con artists. Rowan filled his canteen. "We need to stay alive long enough for Walsh's story to land. After that, we're less valuable dead than alive." "How do you figure?" "Because killing us after the story breaks makes us martyrs, makes the whole thing bigger. Railroad's smart enough to know that." He paused. "Probably." They rode into the mountains as the sun climbed higher. Behind them, somewhere in the distance, their hunters would be organizing. Fresh horses, better equipment, local knowledge. It would be a race to see who reached the high country first. By afternoon, they entered familiar territory. The trails Rowan knew, the mountains he'd called home for 20 years. Here, the advantage shifted in their favor. "We're not going to the homestead," Rowan said. "Too obvious. There's another place, higher up. Old trapper's shelter my father used. Only a handful of people know about it. Will it hold them off?" "It'll give us a defensible position. That's all I can promise." They climbed higher, into country where snow still lay deep and temperatures dropped brutally at night. The trail became treacherous, but the horses were mountain-bred and sure-footed. Clara trusted them, trusted Rowan, trusted that somehow they'd survive this. As they rode, she thought about Catherine Walsh back in Denver, working through the night to prepare the story. About Marshall Garrett, who would wake tomorrow to evidence he couldn't ignore. About the railroad executives who had ordered so many deaths and would soon face justice. If they survived, this would all be worth it. The shelter appeared near dusk, a stone structure built against a cliff face, barely visible until you were almost on top of it. Rowan led them inside. It was cold and dark, but solid, defensible. They unsaddled the horses and brought them inside too. The shelter was large enough, barely. They'd all be warm together. "Now what?" Clara asked. "Now we wait." Rowan began checking his weapons, reloading, preparing. "They'll come. Maybe tomorrow, maybe the day after, but they'll come. And we fight. And we fight." Clara loaded her own rifle, hands steady now. The fear was still there, but it had transformed into something harder. Determination, anger, the absolute certainty that she wouldn't let them win. Outside, night fell over the mountains. Somewhere below, their enemies were climbing higher, following their trail. The final confrontation was coming. But for now, in this stone shelter high above the world, Rowan and Clara were together, armed, ready. Whatever came next, they'd face it the way they'd faced everything else, side by side. They came at dawn, just as Rowan predicted. Clara was on watch when she spotted movement below. 6 riders ascending the trail in single file, moving cautiously through the pre-dawn gray. She touched Rowan's shoulder and he woke instantly, moving to the shelter's narrow opening. 6, he confirmed quietly. Maybe more hanging back out of sight. "Do we have enough ammunition? For 6? "Yes. For more—" He didn't finish the sentence. They took positions at opposite sides of the shelter's opening, rifles ready. The riders came closer, spreading out as the trail widened. Clara could see them clearly now, hired guns, well-armed and organized. These weren't the same men from the homestead. The railroad had sent professionals. The lead rider stopped about 100 yards down the trail and called up, "Mercer, we know you're up there. Make this easy on yourself." Rowan didn't answer. "We're not here to kill you. We just want the ledgers. Hand them over and you walk away." "They're lying," Clara whispered. "I know." The rider tried again. "Think about your wife, Mercer. She doesn't need to die for this. Give us what we want." Rowan finally spoke, his voice carrying across the rocks. "The ledgers are already in Denver. You're too late." Silence. Then angry voices below, men conferring. The lead rider shouted back, "You're bluffing!" "Am I?" "Check with your bosses. Ask them if the morning papers came out yet." More confused talking below. One rider broke away, heading back down the trail, probably to get word to Denver, to find out if Rowan was telling the truth. "That bought us maybe an hour," Rowan said. "When they confirm the story's out, they'll know we're just loose ends. That's when they'll come hard." "Good. I'm tired of waiting." He looked at her, something like pride in his eyes. "You've changed. The mountain does that to people. You said so yourself." The remaining 5 riders dismounted and took cover in the rocks below. They weren't advancing yet, but they were positioning themselves for a siege. Smart, professional. Clara and Rowan waited, conserving ammunition, watching for any opening. The sun climbed higher, turning the snow brilliant white. Time crawled. Then distantly, they heard it. A commotion from down the trail. Shouting, gunfire. The rider who'd gone for information came galloping back, his horse lathered and wild-eyed. "It's true," he yelled to the others. "The story broke. It's in all 3 papers. The federal marshals issued warrants." The men below erupted in argument. Clara caught fragments. Waste of time. Already exposed. Finish the job anyway. The lead rider made a decision. "We're going up. They're witnesses. They die here." The attack came in a rush. The 5 men charged up the trail, firing as they came. Bullets ricocheted off stone, whined through the air. Clara fired back, working the rifle mechanically. One man went down, then another. But the others kept coming, using the rocks for cover, advancing steadily. Rowan's rifle cracked beside her, each shot deliberate and deadly. Another attacker fell. But the remaining 2 reached the shelter's entrance, too close for rifles. Rowan dropped his rifle and drew the skinning knife from his belt. The first man came through the opening and Rowan met him head-on, all brutal efficiency and mountain-hardened strength. The knife flashed. The man went down screaming. The last attacker hesitated, saw his dead companions, saw Rowan standing there covered in blood, and made the smart choice. He ran. They heard him crashing down the trail, yelling for his horse, then hoofbeats, fading into distance. Rowan stood in the shelter entrance, breathing hard, knife still in his hand. Clara moved to his side. "You're hurt," she said, seeing blood on his shirt. "Not mine." They checked the bodies. All dead except the one who'd run. Rowan went through their pockets like he had before, collecting papers, identification, anything that might be useful. "These men work directly for the railroad's head of security," he said, reading a letter he'd found. "This wasn't freelance. This was official company business." More evidence. More nails in their coffin. Rowan stood looking down the trail. "The one who got away will tell them we're still alive. They'll send more." "Let them come. The story's out. We won. They're just too stupid to quit." But no more attackers came that day, or the next. On the 3rd day, Jake Morrison appeared on the trail, riding slowly with his hands visible. "I'm alone," he called. "Just bringing news." Rowan let him approach. Morrison looked exhausted but excited, waving a newspaper. "You need to see this," he said, dismounting. "It's everywhere. The whole territory's talking about it." The Denver Post's front page was covered with the story. Catherine Walsh had written it masterfully. Detailed accounts of each murdered family, direct quotes from the ledgers, names of every railroad executive involved. The headline read, "Blood on the Rails, Rocky Mountain Express accused of systematic murder." Below that, a smaller article reported that Marshal Samuel Garrett had arrested 3 railroad executives early that morning. More arrests were expected. The governor had promised a full investigation. "They're done," Morrison said. "The railroad stock crashed yesterday. Investors are pulling out. The board's in chaos." Clara felt something break loose in her chest, relief so intense it made her dizzy. "It's really over?" "The fighting part, anyway." Morrison handed her another newspaper. "You're famous now. Catherine Walsh mentioned you by name. Clara Hastings, former railroad accountant whose courage exposed corruption. There's even a quote from the governor praising you." "They used my real name," Clara said, staring at the paper. "Couldn't avoid it. The story needed a hero. You're it." Rowan took the papers and read them carefully. His expression was unreadable. Finally, he handed them back to Morrison. "What about the men hunting us?" "Recalled. The railroad's lawyers advised them to stop all independent security operations immediately. You're not worth killing anymore. Makes you martyrs and proves everything Walsh wrote." Morrison grinned. "You actually did it. You beat them." After Morrison left, Clara and Rowan sat in the shelter, watching the sun set over the mountains. The papers lay between them, proof that their fight had meant something. 14 families, Clara said quietly. "We didn't save them. They're still dead. But their deaths count for something now. Their names are in those papers. People know what happened to them. That's more than they had before." "Is it enough?" "It has to be." Rowan looked at her. "Justice doesn't bring people back. It just makes sure their deaths weren't meaningless. That's the best we can do." Clara thought about that, about the weight of carrying other people's stories, other people's deaths. She'd started this journey thinking she was running away, but somewhere along the line it had become about running toward something, toward accountability, toward truth, toward a future where the powerful couldn't murder with impunity. "I want to go home," she said. "Back to the homestead. There's nothing there but ruins." "Then we rebuild, like you said." Rowan smiled, the expression transforming his scarred face. "All right, let's go home." They descended from the high country slowly, leading the tired horses, taking time to appreciate the journey. The mountains that had seemed so hostile when Clara first arrived now felt different, still dangerous, still unforgiving, but familiar. Hers. When they reached the homestead, the ruins looked smaller than Clara remembered. The barn was gone completely, just foundation stones. The cabin was charred logs and ash. But the stone fireplace still stood, and the land beneath the snow was still there. "We'll need to clear the debris," Rowan said, surveying the damage. "Then build new. Better than before." "How long will it take? With two of us working? And if we can get supplies up here before the pass closes, maybe we can get walls up before deep winter, finish the interior come spring." Clara looked at him. "You're really planning long-term now." "I've got reasons to." He met her eyes. "You staying? For real? Not just because you've got nowhere else to go?" "I'm staying." "Why?" Clara thought about how to answer. About the woman she'd been in Denver, frightened, hiding, constantly looking over her shoulder, and the woman she'd become here. Someone who could split wood and shoot wolves and face down killers without flinching. "Because this is where I learned who I actually am," she said finally. "Not who I was supposed to be or who I was pretending to be, just me, Clara, the person who could survive this mountain." She paused. "And because you're here." Rowan pulled her close. They stood like that for a long moment, two people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and somehow made it work. "We should start clearing today," he said. "Get ahead of the weather." They worked until dark, hauling burned timber away, sorting through debris for anything salvageable. It was hard, dirty work, but satisfying. Each piece of wreckage they cleared was a step toward rebuilding. That night, they made camp in the barn's foundation, wrapped in blankets under a canvas tarp. The horses and mules stood nearby, familiar presences in the dark. "Tell me about the cabin you're planning," Clara said. "What's different from before?" Rowan thought about it. "Bigger. 2 rooms instead of 1. A real kitchen area. Better windows for light. And a porch that goes all the way around, so we can sit outside when weather's good." "We? You'll have opinions. Might as well account for them now." Clara smiled in the darkness. This hard man planning a future that included her preferences. It was such a small thing, but it meant everything. "I want a garden plot," she said, "near the creek where the soil's good. For vegetables, maybe some herbs." "We can do that. I'll build you a root cellar too for winter storage." They talked late into the night, planning their future home. Not the survival shelter Rowan had built before, but an actual home for 2 people building a life together. Over the following weeks, word spread about what had happened. The story had gone national. Newspapers as far as New York were covering the railroad scandal. 3 executives were in jail awaiting trial. The company had declared bankruptcy. Investors who'd lost money were suing. The whole corrupt structure was collapsing. And Clara's name was everywhere. The woman who brought down the railroad. Frontier hero exposes corporate murder. The attention was overwhelming and unwanted, but it came with something valuable: vindication. Marshall Garrett himself rode up to the homestead one cold morning in early spring. He was a lean man in his 50s with kind eyes and the calm manner of someone who'd seen everything. "Miss Hastings," he said, dismounting. "Or should I say Mrs. Mercer?" "Clara's fine. I wanted to thank you personally. What you did, stealing those ledgers, keeping them safe, getting them to Catherine Walsh, that took real courage." "I didn't feel courageous. I felt terrified. That's what courage is. Doing what needs doing despite being scared." Garrett handed her an envelope. "This is from the territorial governor. Official pardon for any irregularities in how you obtained the evidence. You're clear of any legal trouble." "I was never worried about legal trouble from our side." "No, I suppose you had bigger concerns." Garrett looked at the construction work in progress. New cabin walls rising where the old ones had burned. You planning to stay up here permanently? Yes. Even after everything that happened? Clara looked at Rowan, who was working on the cabin frame with two hired men from town. Especially after everything that happened. Garrett nodded slowly. I understand. Sometimes the places that test us hardest become the places we can't leave. He turned to go, then paused. Oh, one more thing. The railroad's remaining assets are being liquidated. Victims' families are being compensated. But there's also a reward fund for informants whose testimony led to convictions. You're entitled to a significant portion. How significant? $40,000, give or take. Clara's breath caught. That was more money than she'd ever imagined having. I don't want it. What? Give it to the families, the ones in the ledgers. They need it more than I do. Miss Hastings, that's an extraordinary amount of money to turn down. I have everything I need right here. Clara gestured at the land, the rising cabin, the mountains beyond. They lost family members. I just lost a job I hated anyway. It's not the same. Garrett studied her for a long moment. I'll see that it's distributed to the families, but keep a portion. At least enough to finish your home here. You've earned that much. After some negotiation, Clara accepted $5,000, enough to buy proper building materials, windows, a real stove, and supplies to last through the next winter. The rest went to the families. That evening, she told Rowan about the money. You gave away $40,000, he said, shaking his head. I gave away money we didn't earn. The families earned it with their lives. Most people wouldn't see it that way. We're not most people. Rowan pulled her close. No, we're not. With the money and the hired help, construction went faster. By late spring, the new cabin had walls, a roof, and real glass windows. It was bigger than the old one, like Rowan had promised, with separate spaces for different purposes. The kitchen had a proper iron stove. The bedroom was private, separated from the main living area, and the porch wrapped around three sides, offering views of the valley and mountains. Clara planted her garden as soon as the ground thawed. Carrots, potatoes, beans, herbs. She worked the soil with her scarred hands, those soft accountant's hands that had toughened into something capable. One afternoon in June, she was weeding the garden when a rider appeared on the trail. For a moment, old instincts kicked in, fear, the urge to grab a weapon. Then she recognized Catherine Walsh. The journalist dismounted, looking around at the completed cabin and the surrounding homestead. So this is where it all happened. Most of it. Clara stood, brushing dirt from her hands. What brings you up here? I wanted to see for myself, and to thank you properly. Walsh handed her a package. Advance copy of my book. It comes out next month. The book was titled Blood on the Rails, the Clara Hastings story. Clara stared at the cover, an illustration of a woman standing in front of a mountain cabin holding ledgers. You wrote a book about me? About the whole scandal. But yes, you're the central figure. The public can't get enough of the story. Woman versus corrupt railroad, frontier justice, the whole narrative. Walsh smiled. You're an icon now, whether you want to be or not. I really don't want to be. Too late. Your story matters to people. It gives them hope that individuals can fight power and win. Clara invited Walsh inside. The cabin smelled of fresh-cut wood and coffee. Rowan was out checking trap lines, so Clara made coffee, and they sat at the new table. How are you really? Walsh asked. After everything? Tired? Relieved. Different than I was. Clara poured coffee. I keep thinking about those families, wondering who they were, what they were like. I interviewed surviving relatives while researching the book. Would you like to know about them? Clara nodded. Walsh talked for an hour, sharing stories of the murdered families, the Hendersons, who'd homesteaded for 10 years before the railroad wanted their creek access. The Chen family, killed because their land sat on a projected rail route. The Morrison family, Jake's distant cousins, it turned out, burned out for refusing to sell mineral rights. Each name in the ledgers became a real person with a real story. It hurt to hear, but it also felt important. These weren't just numbers or statistics. They were people who'd tried to build lives in hard country, same as Clara and Rowan. They deserved better, Clara said when Walsh finished. They did. But because of you, the men who killed them are facing justice. That's something. After Walsh left, Clara sat on the porch with the book in her lap. She read through it slowly, seeing her own story reflected back in someone else's words. Some of it felt accurate, some felt mythologized, turned into legend. But maybe that was okay. Maybe people needed legends, needed to believe that fighting for what's right could actually work. Rowan returned at sunset carrying a string of rabbits. He saw the book and raised an eyebrow. "You're famous," he said. "Apparently. How does it feel?" "Weird. Wrong. Like it's not really about me." Clara set the book aside. "I didn't do this to be a hero. I did it because it was the only option I had left." That's usually how real courage works. It's not about choosing to be brave. It's about being backed into a corner and finding out what you're made of. That summer, they fell into the rhythm of mountain life. Rowan taught Clara to fish, to read weather patterns, to move through the forest without sound. She taught him to read and write better. He'd learned the basics as a child, but had let it lapse over the years. On long evenings, they'd sit on the porch and she'd read to him from books Morrison brought up from town. The homestead thrived. The garden produced more than they could eat. Rowan's trap lines were profitable. They traded furs and venison in town for supplies and luxuries they couldn't make themselves. And slowly, carefully, they built a real marriage. Not the cold arrangement it had started as, but something forged through shared survival and genuine affection. They fought sometimes. Both were stubborn, both used to living alone. But they always came back together, learning how to bend without breaking. In the fall, Claire discovered she was pregnant. She told Rowan one evening after supper. He stared at her for a long moment, then set down his coffee cup. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor." "There's a doctor in town now. New fellow, young but competent. We'll go down tomorrow, get you checked properly." "Rowan, I'm fine. Women have babies up here all the time without—" "Not my wife. Not my child." His voice was firm. "We do this right." The doctor confirmed it. Claire was about 3 months along, due in the spring. Healthy, showing no complications. He gave them advice about nutrition, rest, warning signs to watch for. Riding back to the homestead, Rowan was quieter than usual. "What are you thinking?" Clara asked. "That I'm terrified." "Of being a father? Of losing you. My mother died giving birth. My aunt too, and 2 cousins. Mountain childbirth is dangerous. So is everything up here we manage. This is different." Clara reached over and took his hand. "I'm scared too. But we're going to be fine. We've survived everything else thrown at us. We'll survive this." That winter was gentler than the one before. They had a solid cabin, plenty of supplies, and each other. Clara's body changed, growing round with new life. Rowan became protective to the point of absurdity, barely letting her lift anything heavier than a coffee pot. "I'm pregnant, not broken," she said one day when he tried to stop her from carrying firewood. "You're carrying my child. That makes you precious cargo." "I'll show you precious cargo." But she smiled as she said it. In March, as snow began to melt, Clara went into labor. Rowan rode to town in record time and brought back the doctor, a midwife, and enough medical supplies for a hospital. The labor was long and difficult. Clara screamed curses at Rowan that would have made a trapper blush. He sat beside her, letting her crush his hand, telling her she was strong. She could do this. And she did. The baby, a girl, was born at dawn, coming into the world screaming her defiance at the cold mountain air. She had Rowan's dark hair and Clara's eyes and lungs that promised she'd have no trouble making herself heard. "She's perfect," Clara said, exhausted, holding the tiny person she'd grown. Rowan touched his daughter's small hand with one scarred finger. The baby gripped it instinctively, and something in his expression broke open, joy and terror and love all mixed together. "What do we name her?" he asked. Clara had been thinking about this. "Hope, because that's what she is." They named her Hope Margaret Mercer, Margaret after Rowan's mother, who'd survived and thrived in these same mountains. Hope because it felt right, because after everything they'd been through, this small person represented a future they'd fought for. The years that followed weren't easy. Mountain life never was. There were hard winters, crop failures, injuries, and the constant work of maintaining a homestead. But there was also joy, watching Hope grow strong and wild, teaching her to love the mountains like they did, building a life that mattered. More families moved into the valley, drawn by news that the railroad's iron grip had been broken. The community grew. They built a school, then a church Claire refused to attend but donated money to anyway. They elected a sheriff, established mail routes, connected to the wider world while maintaining their frontier character. And Clara and Rowan became something neither had expected, pillars of the community. People came to them for advice, for help settling disputes, for medical aid when the doctor was too far. Their story became local legend, told and retold until fact and fiction blurred together. But the truth was simpler than the legends. They were just two damaged people who'd found each other when both desperately needed saving. They'd fought for justice because no one else would. They'd built a life in hard country because that's where they felt most themselves. On their 10th anniversary, they stood on the porch of their cabin, watching Hope play with the goat kids in the yard. She was 8 now, tall for her age, with her father's strength and her mother's sharp mind. "You ever regret answering that mail order arrangement?" Rowan asked. Clara thought about the woman she'd been, frightened, running, desperate, and the woman she'd become, confident, rooted, home. "Not once," she said. "You?" "I regret thinking you were a mistake. Took me too long to see what you actually were." "Which was?" "Everything I didn't know I needed." He pulled her close. "The mountain didn't make you strong, Clara. You were always strong. You just needed somewhere that would let you prove it." She leaned against him, watching their daughter laugh in the afternoon sun. The cabin they'd built stood solid behind them. The mountains rose eternal beyond. And for the first time in her life, Clara felt completely at peace. The railroad scandal faded from headlines eventually, replaced by new outrages and injustices. But it left lasting change. New laws protected homesteaders, corporate accountability became enforceable, and 14 families got justice, however delayed. Years later, when Hope was grown and had children of her own, she'd ask her mother about those days. About stealing the ledgers, about the men who came hunting, about the night the cabin burned. And Clara would tell her the truth, not the legendary version, but the real one. About being terrified and doing it anyway. About finding love in the worst circumstances. About learning that strength isn't about never being afraid. It's about what you do despite the fear. "Were you a hero, Mama?" Hope would ask. And Clara would answer the same way every time. "I was just a person who refused to quit." Sometimes that's all heroism is. Because that was the lesson the mountain had taught her. That survival isn't about being perfect or fearless. It's about getting up one more time than you get knocked down. It's about building something worth protecting, then protecting it with everything you have. The cabin still stands today, though the people who built it are long gone. The foundation stones Rowan laid with his own hands. The porch Clara designed for watching sunsets. The garden plot where she grew food for her family. If you visit, and few do, it's remote enough to discourage casual tourists. You can still see the scars on the land from that long-ago fire. And if you know where to look, by the creek under an overhang of rock, there's a marker stone with 14 names carved into it. The families Clara fought for. The people whose deaths she made sure mattered. Standing there, in that hard, beautiful country, you can understand why two broken people chose to build their lives there. Why they stayed when leaving would have been easier. Why they fought when surrender would have been safer. Because some places don't just test you, they transform you. They strip away everything soft and false until only truth remains. And for Clara and Rowan, the truth was simple. They belonged to each other, to this mountain, to the life they'd forged from fire and violence and stubborn determination. Nothing smooth about it, nothing perfect. Just real and hard-won, and theirs. And in the end, that was more than enough.
I like scoops for chili. Flats for dips.
I don't know. I didn't know these fucking monsters can open the doors, to be honest.
Dude, I was up on the platform and one of them walked up. I have no idea how.
Wasn't he most paranoid? That's just fucked up.
Welcome back, Genghis.
Hello.
Hello.
Here we go. Ben, do you eat your dip with scoops or flats?
Did anyone else? Did you cut out out for everyone else?
Yeah, you cut out.
Do you
Do I
eat your
what?
dip with scoops or flats?
Like tortilla chip?
Yeah, or like a scoop.
If scoops preferably, but
Scoops for chili.
Wait, I haven't played this map.
wait, don't everyone go on the bridge.
I'm gonna fuck them up.
I do like flat tortillas though. I mean not tortilla chips.
They're goated. Okay, one last one. Oh, let's go. Yippee!
Seems like we immediately have cancer, James.
It can't be that bad, can it?
Ooh, engine. Ooh, gift. Seems like we have immediately contracted
Happening here.
AIDS.
Ah, you farted. You farted, dude. Holy shit. Flatulence alert. Oh. Ew. Ew.
This is a wet one.
That was you shat. You shit yourself.
So we're just gonna run through the cancer?
Yeah, I don't give a fart. It ain't nothing to me, man. Just don't stay in it for too long.